Hi, everybody. This is Let's Figure It Out with Marrero. Welcome to my channel. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Today's topic is about George Air Force Base, but I wanted to talk about July 16th, 1945. We had a military operation in Mexico where they were inventing a nuclear bomb. And with this nuclear bomb, the name of it was called Jumbo, and Jumbo was designed and used at Trinity site, actually involved in two explosions. The first explosion was conventional explosion involving the TNT, and then the fraction of the second later, the nuclear explosion. Chain reaction was maintained. The scientists were sure the TNT would explode, but initially were unsure of the plutonium. If the chain reaction failed to occur, the TNT would blow the very rare and dangerous plutonium all over the countryside. So the inventor of Jumbo was afraid that it wouldn't work. So what they did was they took it to uh, New Mexico and they continued to build Jumbo and they designed it um, for it to explode, but for it to explode like 25 feet long and 10 feet in diameter. It weighed 214 pounds. Um, the scientists put the bomb inside a huge steel because it contained TNT explosion, and and they were trying to prevent other people from getting hurt. So on July 16th, they put Jumbo on a military tank and they took it to the area where they were going to detonate Jumbo, which is called the Trinity site. And at the Trinity site, once they made it there, they put Jumbo up on a tower. And with a crane, they lifted Jumbo up with inside the crane to detonate Jumbo. So once they lifted Jumbo, they went ahead and detonated Jumbo. They say when Jumbo detonated that Jumbo was as bright as 12 suns. They have several pictures of it online. Um, it is a very traumatizing scene. Um, Ground Zero was 800 yards from the tower that they lifted it on. So windows exploded from houses. The tremors was felt throughout the subdivision because the actual bomb was built inside of a house, like a regular house. They built this nuclear weapon inside of a house. And it destroyed the tower once Jumbo was detonated, which it disintegrated like into just metal. So they were very excited that Jumbo detonated and that it was a success. The only thing is that Jumbo was a site that because of the radiation, they did not go anywhere near the site for like umpteenth years, and they just left Jumbo where it actually landed after the scientists, which were military officers, um, detonated Jumbo. And exactly where they left it at, that's where it remained until years later when they were able to come close to the site, um, and pick Jumbo up and move it to where the landmark is now. Um, there is like tourist attractions there. Um, they have trinitites there, which is like a mixture of the bomb going off and it mixes with the sand where it actually detonated, and it like creates a like a stone or some type of rock that carries radiation in it. But um it's not enough radiation to harm anyone, but enough of trinitite on the scene can potentially harm humans, which is the reason why they left Jumbo where it landed once it was detonated. Um, Jumbo right now is a tourist attraction. They have certain times where they open it up for people to come, and they can see like uh, different sizes of the trinitites, and they come with like these meters, and the meters tells you like how high the radiation in each meter is. And that is exposure. It's TNT exposure, which is what actually detonates. It's like what creates the nuclear weapon. So we're gonna move forward to George Air Force Base. And George Air Force Base was established by the United States Army Air Corps as an advanced flying school in June of 1941. George Air Force Base is closed, and it closed at the end of World War II. George Air Force Base was again activated as a training base by the United States Air Force with the outbreak of the Korean War in November of 1950. George Air Force Base remained a training base throughout the Cold War and in the immediate post Cold War period. Later on, years later, um, the whole point there was airplanes were landing at that Air Force base, and they were training Air Force MPs to fly airplanes. And they had those trainees and their families live on base, and people started to like get sick. And as they were getting sick, um, there's a hospital. The Air Force base has a hospital. It has like a photo lab, and it has basically everything inside of the Air Force base. So going to the doctor was like just going around the corner. And the volume of MPs and MP dependents was like getting really high, as far as being sick, um, with headache. They said the water tasted strange. Um, they said that, and this is actual quotes from soldiers and dependents that suffered this at George Air Force Base. And um, it got to the point where the dependents and the officers that were living on base were so skeptical about the water that they started purchasing their own water to be able to drink. Um, Allegations are that George Air Force Base did not notify anyone that there was nuclear weapons stored at George Air Force Base, which has been a constant denial of the state of California on behalf of the United States, because the United States has Soviet immunity, which means the United States cannot be sued by any government employee. So, yeah, malpractice suit. Um, but it's very difficult to prove that because there's immunity. There's no way that it's like top secret stuff, and it's very hard to prove that they got sick at the military base. So, George Air Force Base was one of 35 bases that had fighter interceptor squadrons and low yield nuclear weapons for stopping enemy bomber attacks. The early nuclear weapons, non sealed pits, required regular on site maintenance, and a considerable amount of radioactive contamination waste will be generated during the POBE initiators replacement operations. The Air Force has repeatedly denied that there were any nuclear weapons at George AFB. So, the nuclear weapons would be to protect the United States from anybody coming to attack us, which is like ready power, right? But George always denied that there was any type of radioactive contamination or waste at that base, that they were just um, a training school for Air Force flight for pilots. So, as we move on, um, the Air Force Base um, continued to get MPs and their dependents into the hospital with the same complaints over and over again. The George Air Force Base was closed pursuant to a decision by the 1988 Base Realignment and Closure Commission at the end of the Cold War. Now George is the site of Southern California's logistic airport since 2009. The California Air National Guard 196 Reconnaissance Squadron has operated MQ-1 Predator remotely piloted aircraft training facility at that site, which means even though the Air Force Base closed down, which means no one is living there anymore, because every facility has a number of complaints a year that they can receive. And due to the high volume, I mean, it was like 100,000 people complaining of um, being sick, and it was always like, oh, nothing is wrong, or it'd be minute things or whatever it was that the doctors were telling them, it wasn't enough, and people just continued to get sick. So once George closed down, they left the runway open to train pilots just in the runway. Nobody was living there. The hospital closed, and all the other facilities that were within the Air Force Base closed as well. And um, as these pilots continued to train, it's they were getting exposed somehow, but there was no way to prove that. So um, I was going over the medical complaints at George, and the complaints included 91B radioactive material, RAM, and this is a April 1st, 2019 post. A term 91B refers to highly classified radioactive material, RAM, covered under Section 91B of the Atomic Energy Act, AEA, of 1954, associated with the current nuclear weapons material legacy, nuclear weapons maintenance, waste, residuals, and nuclear weapons, accidents, incidents, some residuals from the atmosphere, testing of nuclear weapons, and residuals of the nuclear operations 1, 2, and 3. Installations located in the United States that opposes residual 91B. So, under the Atomic Energy of 1951, the nuclear weapons, which is the waste, and waste would be like if these weapons are being stored and they're not being maintained, everything being stored that it has any type of liquid or chemical, it becomes waste. Like it has to be maintained, like it has to be cleaned up, because it seeps out of whatever the radioactive material is stored in. So that's how people were getting exposed, allegedly, because it is air. It's air. It's carried in the air. It's radioactive nuclear weapons that is it transports in the air. So the exposure is like through the water, touching things within the base, things like that, is how um, this radioactive chemical was exposing people. So, according to the same dated post, which is April 1st of 2019, it says the VA is defrauding atomic veterans of medical care and compensation for their SC injuries. So, the United States Veteran Affairs is defrauding atomic veterans of their families of medical care and compensation for the veterans' service connected SC injuries. Hmm. So all these people are living were living at this military base. A lot of people um, were stationed somewhere else. A lot of people moved other places to get away from George because they were not feeling good at all. And um, over 100,000 military personnel and veterans were exposed to highly classified radioactive material from the Department of Defense, nuclear, reactors, or nuclear weapons, or subjected to DoD or VA radiation research. Veterans Benefit Administration recognizes only an external exposure to ionizing radiation and will acknowledge only a handful of cancers as qualifying as a service connected injury. Because the VBA refuses to recognize the full scope of the radiation induced injuries caused by an exposure to radioactive material, which is RAM, the veterans and their families are denied medical care and compensations for the veteran service connected SC injuries. So as I read medical complaints, um, I was deeply saddened by the different um, things that happen to the body due to radioactive exposure. Um, it basically, once you've been exposed to radioactive material, like any part of your body can be damaged. Um, I read, I'm not going to disclose the people's name, but just going to briefly tell you a couple of stories. Uh, one one story is there was a soldier who had just recently gotten married with his wife, and they moved on base. And they were stationed at George, and they moved in. They lived there for about a year or so, and they got pregnant with their first child. She ended up losing the baby. But during this period of um, pregnancy, they were like having side effects, like um, they were like the water tasted funny, and his wife was really, really sick, and they they chose to like kind of just ignore it a little, thinking, oh, just like whatever, and um eventually they got pregnant again. um After the first pregnancy, and they had a girl at George Air Force Base. um the soldier and his family were stationed at another military base, and as they were stationed there, his wife was still sick, and she was way sicker than he was. Um, and their daughter was like sick as well, and developed autism. While they were stationed at their new military base, they got pregnant again, and this time they had a boy. And the mother and the daughter, they've already established that they got sick. They just have to be able to prove that they got sick at George. And there was like absolutely no way to um, prove that, because according to the according to the medical doctors, there was nothing wrong with them. So, or the exposure or those side effects were not in relation to being exposed, or they just denied everything. So she got pregnant. She had a son at the new when they were stationed at their new military base, and eventually their son was sick as well, and eventually they found out that their son had autism as well. They've been fighting for disability. They've been fighting for the government to acknowledge that they were exposed at George so that they can get the medical attention that they need. And they have been unsuccessful. So, as we move on to the next story, I find that to be really, really sad that um, they're ill and they can't even get any medical attention to get better. And I think that as a person who serves the United States, they actually deserve that. And I was deeply saddened by that story because um, they were newlyweds having a family, and his job is what provided for for their family, and it became kind of like a nightmare, and nobody wants a nightmare when they're freshly getting married and excited about their job and things like that. So there's like other stories that are clipped on as well to this um, article that I pulled on George. So May 18th of 2018, Duty Jen Matt Mattis, President Trump's promise to honor the contract. Thousands of veterans and their family members are being defrauded of their Department of Veteran Affairs and Social Security disability insurance benefits because veterans were exposed to classified radioactive debris or material while serving in the military. The injured veterans have been fighting for recognition of our service connected SC injuries for 38 to 72 years, and many of them have spent decades severely ill, in pain, and homeless. Unfortunately, many of them have died from diseases um, and conditions and illnesses related to the radioactive de- waste and debris at George, which resulted as a result of the radiation. So, none of this has been actually proven, but there are some families who were acknowledged. Um, Only a handful of families were acknowledged for certain types of cancer. Um, and it says exposure is through inhalation, indigestion of the radioactive particles. Some people have committed suicide while waiting for justice, in reference to George A.F.B. I am mentioning this because I think we deserve a little attention because if any of you know, 1988 was an era where like Desert Storm happened, and like I was a little girl and I remember Desert Storm, and I remember how serious it was. And for people to be fighting for 38 to 72 years to get some type of medical attention, it's really harsh. But at the same time, there's a lot of them who've been exposed and that have made it and who are still alive today. Um, I wanted to mention uh, as of, let me see, According to The Sun, which is the newspaper in California, it says court tosses lawsuit alleging George AFB toxic exposure health issues. We did not agree to be needlessly poisoned by the country. We swear to protect, says Frank Vera, a former airman and plaintiff in the lawsuit. 51, this is quotes from the Sun newspaper in California. 51 plaintiffs who contended they were exposed to toxic chemicals at former George Air Force Base and later suffered an array of medical problems from cancer to heart disease, miscarriages, infertility, and have lost their bid to sue the government. On August 18th, United States District Court Judge Virginia A. Phillips dismissed the 2021 negligence suit filed by the plaintiffs who lived on or near former base in Victorville, ruling the federal government has immunity and cannot be sued unless it waives that immunity, which is how a handful of dependents and soldiers were able to get treatment for cancers and certain types of diagnosis. And it's only when the government opens that door to take certain suits. Other than that, anyone who's filed a suit has got to wait until the government is prepared to admit to these medical issues, um, to pay these claims and to pay the victims of the claim. A Federal Tort Claims Act enacted in 1941. It provides a legal means to compensate individuals who have suffered personal injury, death, property loss, or damage caused by negligence, wrongful act, or admission of federal workers acting within the scope of their employment. It isn't surprising that Phillips dismissed the suit. Given the high bar for the federal claim, Mr. Sarita, an attorney of the plaintiff, said in an email. So, like I said, this has been 38 to 72 years of trying to gain something in regards to this exposure, and it's just never like only a handful of people who are able to accomplish that. The court demonstrates how difficult it is to get justice on behalf of military families who have suffered harm from toxic contaminations while living on the military installation. Attorneys for the government did not respond for requests or comment. From at least 1941, which is when George opened, or when people first started complaining was in 1941 through 1992. Air Force members and their families and other families living around George. It was 5,347 acres. That's how big George is. They were exposed to soil, water, air contaminants, according to the lawsuit. The Environmental Protection Agency designated George as a Superfund site in 1991. 2 years later, the base was decommissioned by the government. Lurking in the water supply and the soil beneath the former base are 33 hazardous chemicals, including plumes of spent jet fuels and trickle, some type of chemical in the water, and the industrial solvent used to degrease planes. The chemicals can be harmful to the nervous system, kidneys, heart, and other vital organs, and according to the EPA, has been found to cause cancer in mice and rats. So that means that the United States actually didn't know what the radioactive chemical that was causing harm to people. So, of course, they can't just open up a claim and be like, yeah, this really happened when they don't even know. They have to test to make sure that this chemical that's here is the chemical that is causing a problem with a medical problem within the military dependent or the soldier that was stationed there at that time. And it's a lot of investigation, a lot of scientific yays and nays that has to go on before a person can actually gain um, some type of compensation on their medical claim or on their disability claim. So, um, efforts by the EPA to clean up contamination at George began in 1996 and will continue until at least 2077. That is a very long time, a very, very long time. But the United States has um, tested George, and there's certain chemicals and toxic hazardous radioactive substances present at George Air Force Base that this makes the suit say yes. So if the soldier and the dependents um, test positive for these hazardous radioactive substances, then the United States will um, acknowledge their claim and compensate the suit. So as of now, 51 people were denied as of last week, a week and a half. 51 people were denied from compensation from their suits. I really don't know how long they were waiting for their suit to come before the United States or before the state on behalf of the United States to get denied. But obviously, if it said 38 to 72 years, well, that's a very long time. Yes, that's a very long time. And I just wanted to give my condolences to any soldiers at George who have passed. Um, I am praying for um, all the families that are involved and are sick and that are in need of medical attention. I pray that you get the medical attention that you need because we all deserve that. We live in the United States. We shouldn't have to be denied of medical services. And at least the courts are still open to listen to these claims because 1992 was the last time that um, civilians actually lived on base as dependents and as soldiers or MPs. So the suit said it was over 100,000 claims. Um, and I pray that the doors open up and that you're able to get the medication that you need. Because this is horrible. This is like really, really horrible. Um, Even though we're trained um, in whatever our specialty is, as far as professions and as far as what we do as a career, no one ever expects or no one ever thinks that something like this could happen to them. And wow, 100,000 is a lot of people um, that are in need of attention, but it's not a lot of people to take care of, to be heard correctly, to be diagnosed, to be treated. I'm pretty sure a hospital, an emergency room goes through 100,000 people, I would say in 5 days. 100,000 people can be admitted to an emergency room in a state. So 100,000 is not a lot to convince me of not being able to help those that signed up to represent the United States and to represent our country. And I just wanted to acknowledge all the soldiers and all the families from George Air Force Base and let you know that I'm thinking about you, I'm praying for you. And according to the prison health standards, the NCCHC, which is the National Commission on Correctional Healthcare, the 2014 Standard Health Service, which, speaking in another term, everyone knows that our healthcare generally comes from prisons to the outside, which is how it works better. Um, the prisons did revise their standards for health services book, which is the training for people who work within the correctional facility. And they revised, the 2014 book was revised in 2018. So, it's a slow process, or it's a slow progress, but I'm a nurse and I've been thoroughly trained and I love my job. And I do believe that mistakes were made. Malpractice does exist. And some people need correction, some people need training. And 2014 was revised for 2018 for that to occur. There's still some doctors and nurses who really don't care about their profession and they just continue to commit malpractice. But there are some people who really generally just are tired and who really want to get a diagnosis and treatment. And for those people who are in that situation, I pray that you find that doctor um, to let you out of all the stress and anxiety from knowing that you're constantly going to the doctor and not being taken care of. So, this is Let's Figure It Out with Marrero, and I pray for everybody at George. AFB.